Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. Today is March 23. Today, as we continue in our daily Bible reading together, we get back into that cycle that we were looking at several days before the little interjection of the story of Ruth yesterday. We're back to a time in the history of God's people where they're still learning how to be God's people, where they continue to fall into sin and God continues to deliver them through the judges. I want us to notice as we move to the next judge in today's reading, this is probably the most unusual of God's judges. He's a very unusual character. His name is Samson. I want us to notice the commentary section at the bottom of page 369 because this explains it all very well. The simple purity and love of Ruth is only a quiet interlude in the violent era of the judges. While the average Israelite seeks to fill his land peaceably, it is still necessary to contend with the marauding Philistines. From their highly civilized coastal cities, the Philistines have moved throughout Canaan with ease, perhaps due to their prolific use of iron, both in farming tools and in weapons of war. Their unusually strong military arms seem to call for an unusually strong response. Enter Samson. Now, as Samson's story begins to be told in the narrative, we read this expression. It shouldn't surprise us at all. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. God is going to use Samson in some unique ways to punish these warring Philistines. Now, Samson has a lot of problems of his own. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite expressions ever used to describe Samson is in a book that I read one time by Charles Swindoll, who said that Samson is a he-man with a she weakness. That's kind of corny, but it's so fitting, isn't it? Samson is going to be destroyed by his weakness for women, and we'll see that as the story unfolds in today's reading. Now, before Samson is even born, this is also quite common in Scripture. There is a faithful man and a faithful woman who have not been able to have children. Here it is again. And unexpectedly, God appears with an angel to this woman while she is away from her husband, professing to her and prophesying to her that she's going to bear a child, and begins to tell her how to raise this child, that he's going to observe the Nazirite vow from his birth. And we've read about the Nazirite vow when we were going through the law in the book of Leviticus. So the Nazirite child is promised to a man named Manoah and his wife. And I love this. When she tells her husband about the vision, when she tells him about the encounter with this angel, he wants to go with her and to see if the angel will reappear. And when the angel does reappear, the very first thing Manoah asks is, will you please show us when this child is born how to be good parents? Would you please show us how we should raise this child in a way that's in keeping with the will of God? Let's pause for just a moment. Isn't that a great prayer for every parent, even today? As young people come together and marry one another and express their love for one another and decide it's time to expand their family and have a child, wouldn't this be an amazing prayer? Father, would you show us how to be good parents? Would you show us in the birth of this baby how we can raise him or her in a way that's in keeping with your will? I love the fact that Manoah makes that request of this angel. So the angel is not going to stay around for very long. And Manoah says, let me at least bring you some food to eat. And the angel says, well, I'm not going to eat, but if you want to make an offering of the food, I'll acknowledge that. So Manoah does, and he offers a burnt offering there in the presence of the angel. And then an amazing thing happens. The angel gets in the fire of the offering and uses that in a way to ascend back into heaven, right there in the presence of Manoah and his wife. Now, Samson is born, and Samson is honoring the Nazirite vow as his parents have been taught. And then we jump to a period where Samson is growing up, and he's now a grown man who, as we mentioned earlier, is beginning to be interested in women. Samson sees a Philistine woman that he wants, and he requests her of his parents. And again, he may be a he-man with all this strength, but he has a she weakness. Samson sees a lion that starts to attack him, and he kills this lion. And then later, when he's going to marry this woman that's been acquired for him, Samson sees the carcass of that lion he had killed earlier, and he notices that there are bees there that have made honey. He takes the honey and he eats it, and then it forms in his mind a riddle. So when he goes to this wedding feast, he proudly stands before the crowd, these people that have been gathered to attend him at this wedding, 30 of them as a matter of fact, and he says, I have a riddle for you. Out of the eater something sweet, and so on. And he says, if you can guess this riddle, then I will give you 30 new garments of clothing for the 30 people who are present. But if by the end of the feast you can't guess the riddle, then you have to give me 30 garments of clothing. So he's getting kind of proud, or you might say a little cocky here. So they struggle trying to figure out this riddle, and they can't. And after a few days, they go to his wife and they say, you better find out for us the answer to this riddle. We will not be humiliated. We will not be embarrassed. We'll destroy you and your father. So she goes to Samson and she starts to whine and cry and say, you don't really love me. And finally, Samson tells her the riddle. It's about the lion and the honey that was there. So when the seventh day of the feast comes and Samson challenges the guests again, this time they answer his riddle. And he has to give them 30 garments of clothing. And he's angry because, in his words, they plowed with his heifer. They went and played unfairly in this little game. And so he goes out and he kills 30 Philistines to get their clothing to give to these men as a response to guessing his riddle. So Samson just kills 30 men like it's nothing. Later, he's angry and he ties some foxtails together, sets them on fire, sends them through the grain fields of the Philistines, burning down all their crops and their vineyards and their olive groves are all destroyed because Samson's wife had been given to his friend. All of this is just going against Samson, and nothing seems to be in control. Samson's wife then and her father are actually burned to death by the Philistines. Samson's angry with that. He says he's going to get revenge on them. He's bound with ropes, but he breaks the ropes. He kills 100 more Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. Samson at one point lifts city gates when they think they're about to ambush him and carries the gates on his back. All this great strength is demonstrated to wipe out little by little these Philistines who are being punished for their pagan ways. Finally, we're told of the more famous story of Samson marrying Delilah. And Delilah is one who really prods trying to find out the nature of Samson's strength. She's been told she'll be rewarded handsomely financially if she can reveal his strength. So she goes to Samson 3 times, and 3 times he tells her his secret, and each time she tries to bind him in the way that he has said he can be bound. And then when she calls out that the Philistines are upon him, he's able to break free. So 3 times she's tried to deceive him, 3 times he has lied to her, and 3 times she has shown her hand, so to speak, that she's really out to destroy him. And still the 4th time, Samson finally relents when she begins to cry and whine and say, you don't really love me. He tells her that his strength is the fact that he's a Nazirite and has never cut his hair. So she shaves his head while he's sleeping. And here's the interesting part. Samson never realizes that the power of the Lord has left him. Then when the Philistines seize him, he is unable to break free. They gouge out his eyes. They make a prisoner of him. They make sport of him. They bring him into the theater to demonstrate great things to them and to entertain them, perform for them. And all these Philistines have gathered and they're all laughing and carrying on and having a big party. And Samson asks the servant to place him where he can put his hands on the pillars to steady himself here in the temple. When the servant does so, Samson begs God, let me just one more time have my revenge upon the Philistines. And so Samson, with all of his strength, pushes the columns and the house comes down, literally, killing thousands of Philistines. Samson kills more Philistines in his death than he ever did in his life. It's really kind of a tragic story. He has so much potential. He has so much physical strength. And yet all through his life, he's using it out of vengeance and hatred and wanting to get back. And yet God is still using him to accomplish his will. He's using him to subdue the Philistines, to pay back the Philistines, or maybe we should say to punish the Philistines for all their warring behavior, all their pagan behavior, all their rebellion against God. God can still use Samson even when Samson is really not a very godly judge. And then Israel once again has peace during the time of Samson. The cycle continues to repeat itself. It's an amazing, a very interesting, fascinating story. But again, remember, don't forget this one. The story is not about Samson, nor about Delilah. The story is about God. And God still accomplishes his will, even when his people seemingly get in the way. Isn't it great to serve a God like this, who always is able to know what's best and to work out his will, not only for us, but in spite of us? Isn't it great to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.